Long before true crime had a name, Appalachia hid a story so disturbing that it was passed only in whispers, never in writing. The mist came down like a burial shroud over Harlan County, Kentucky, settling into the hollers and valleys where the sun rarely reached, even in summer. Ruby Mae Jessup stood on the sagging porch of her grandmother's house, watching the fog swallow the mountains whole. At 17, she'd seen enough of these hills to know they kept secrets the way coal seams kept pressure, deep, dark, and dangerous. Girl, you gonna stand there gawking all morning, or you gonna help me with these jars? Her grandmother's voice cut through the white silence. Mama Jessup was 83 years old and hard as the bedrock beneath their feet. She'd buried 3 husbands, raised 6 children in a 2-room shack, and outlived most of her generation. The mountains hadn't broken her. Nothing had. Ruby turned from the porch railing, her bare feet silent on the weathered boards. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and preserves, the sweet tang of strawberries mixing with the ever-present coal dust that infiltrated everything in these parts. Even after the mines had closed, the dust remained, ghost sediment from ghost industries. "Yes, ma'am," Ruby said, though her mind was elsewhere. Tomorrow, she'd be leaving. The acceptance letter from the community college in Lexington was folded in her pocket, worn soft from repeated reading. She hadn't told Mama yet, hadn't told anyone except her brother Jesse, and he'd just laughed that bitter laugh of his and said, "You ain't going nowhere, Ruby. These hills got their hooks in you, same as the rest of us." Maybe he was right. Maybe the mountains wouldn't let her go. But she had to try. Mama was in the kitchen, her gnarled hands working steadily as she sealed mason jars of preserves. The wood stove radiated heat despite the cool morning, making the small room stifling. Ruby took her place at the table and began preparing the next batch of berries, her knife moving with practiced efficiency. "Tell me about Mama," Ruby said suddenly. It was a question she'd asked 100 times before, always hoping for new details, new clues to the woman who died bringing her into the world. Mama's hands paused for just a moment. "What's got you thinking on Sarah today?" "Just wondering." Ruby kept her eyes on the berries. "What was she like when she was my age? Did she ever want to leave?" The old woman sighed, a sound like wind through a cave mouth. "Your mama had dreams bigger than these mountains could hold. Smart as a whip, that girl. Could have done anything she wanted." Mama's voice grew distant. "But your daddy came along with his smooth words and his promises, and well, you know how that story ends." Ruby did know. Her father, Tucker Jessup, had worked the mines until black lung claimed him when she was 10. He'd been a hard man, made harder by the coal dust filling his lungs and the poverty grinding down his spirit. Her mother had died giving birth to her, and sometimes Ruby wondered if that was a mercy. To die before the mountains could break you the way they broke everyone else. She wanted to be a teacher, Mama continued, her hands resuming their work. Had a scholarship to a school down in North Carolina. Then she met your daddy at a church social, and that was that. Love's a powerful thing, child, sometimes powerful enough to kill you. The words hung in the air like smoke. Ruby thought of her own dreams, folded in her pocket. Was she making the same mistake? But no, she wasn't running toward a man. She was running toward herself, toward a version of Ruby Mae Jessup that these mountains had never seen. "I got accepted to college," Ruby said quietly. "Lexington Technical, Got a scholarship and everything. Mama's hands stilled again. When she looked up, her eyes were sharper than any knife. When were you planning on telling me? I'm telling you now. Classes start when? 2 weeks. The old woman turned back to her jars, but Ruby could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her fingers that hadn't been there before. Well then, Mama said finally, guess you better start packing. Ruby had expected anger or tears or pleas to stay. The calm acceptance was somehow worse. You're not mad? Mad? Girl, I'm terrified. Mama set down a jar with more force than necessary. Terrified you'll go out there and forget where you come from. Terrified you'll stay and end up like your mama, dead before your time with nothing but might have beens. But mostly, I'm terrified that no matter what you choose, these mountains will have their say. What do you mean? Mama wiped her hands on her apron and sat down heavily in the chair across from Ruby. Her face, weathered as old leather, suddenly looked every one of its 83 years. There's things about this family you don't know, things about these hills. Your mama knew, and look what happened to her. A chill ran down Ruby's spine, despite the heat from the stove. Mama, you're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. The old woman reached across the table and gripped Ruby's hand with surprising strength. Listen to me, child. The Jessup women, we got a gift, or a curse, depending on how you look at it. We see things, know things. Your mama saw her own death clear as day. Told me the night before you were born that she wouldn't survive it. Ruby tried to pull her hand away, but Mama held firm. That's just superstition. Is it? You ever wonder why you know things before they happen? Why you dream true dreams? Why you can feel the mountains watching you? Ruby's mouth went dry. She had wondered. All her life, she'd had moments of knowing, when Jessie would come home drunk, when the neighbor's baby would be born early, when the old oak tree would fall across the road in a storm. She'd learned to dismiss it, to rationalize it as coincidence or intuition. The mountains take a toll, Ruby May, especially on women like us. And there's something else. Mama's voice dropped to a whisper. Something old living in these hills, older than the coal, older than the Cherokee who came before us. It feeds on sorrow and suffering, and Lord knows this land has seen plenty of both. Mama, please. Your mama tried to leave once before she met your daddy, got as far as the county line before she turned back. Said she felt something pulling at her like invisible chains. When she came home, she cried for 3 days straight. A month later, she met Tucker at that church social. Mama finally released Ruby's hand. I'm telling you this because you need to know what you're up against. If you really want to leave, you got to be strong, stronger than your mama was. Ruby stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't believe in curses or mountain spirits or whatever you're talking about. I'm going to college and I'm going to make something of myself, and no superstition is going to stop me. Mama just looked at her with sad, knowing eyes. I hope you're right, child. I truly do. But remember this. The mountains always remember their own, and they don't like to let go. 2 weeks later, Ruby stood at the Greyhound station in Hazard with a single duffel bag containing everything she owned. Jesse had driven her in his beat-up Ford, the same truck that had belonged to their father. He'd barely spoken the whole ride, just chain-smoked Marlboros, and stared at the winding road ahead. You don't have to do this, he said, as they sat in the parking lot. the engine ticking as it cooled. Plenty of work at the new chicken processing plant. Ain't glamorous, but it's honest. Ruby looked at her brother. At 25, he already looked 40. Lines carved deep around his eyes, his hands calloused and scarred, his shoulders permanently hunched from years of hard labor. He'd been handsome once, before the mountains had their way with him. "I love you, Jessie," she said, "but I can't end up like you." She regretted the words immediately, but they couldn't be taken back. Jessie's jaw tightened, and he nodded slowly. "Yeah, well, good luck out there." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn $20 bill. "Take this, for emergencies." "Jessie, I can't." "Take it, Ruby May." His voice cracked slightly. "Let me do this one thing for you." She took the money, tears blurring her vision. They hugged awkwardly across the center console, and then she was out of the truck, bag in hand, walking toward the station without looking back. If she looked back, she might not go. And she had to go. She had to. The bus ride to Lexington took 6 hours, winding through mountains that seemed to press in from all sides. Ruby kept her face pressed to the window, watching her homeland scroll past. Weathered barns, abandoned mine entrances, trailer parks clinging to hillsides like barnacles. This was Appalachia, beautiful and brutal, generous and grudging, her home and her prison. As they crossed the county line, Ruby felt it, a sudden, wrenching pull in her chest, as if something had hooked into her ribs and was trying to drag her back. She gasped, pressing her hand to her sternum. The woman in the seat next to her, a middle-aged lady heading to visit her daughter, looked over with concern. "You all right, honey?" "Fine," Ruby managed. "Just carsick." But it wasn't carsickness, it was the mountains, just like Mama had said. Ruby closed her eyes and willed herself to breathe, to push through it. The sensation gradually faded as they put more miles between her and Harlan County, but it never fully disappeared. It settled in her bones like the coal dust back home, a permanent reminder of where she'd come from. Lexington was overwhelming. The campus alone had more people than her entire hometown. The buildings were new and clean, without the patina of coal dust and hardship that covered everything back home. Ruby's roommate was a girl from Louisville named Ashley, blonde, bubbly, with clothes that probably cost more than Ruby's entire wardrobe. "Oh my God, is that really your accent?" Ashley said within 5 minutes of meeting her. "It's so cute. Say something else." Ruby smiled tightly and didn't say anything else for the rest of the night. The first few weeks were harder than anything Ruby had experienced. Not the classes. Those came easy to her sharp mind, but the social aspect was brutal. People treated her like a curiosity, a hillbilly mascot. They asked if she'd worn shoes growing up, if she was related to her cousins, said with a meaningful smirk, if she'd ever seen indoor plumbing. Some were genuinely curious, but most were mocking, finding entertainment in her otherness. She learned to modify her accent, to hide where she came from. She told people she was from Eastern Kentucky, rather than naming Harlan County specifically. She never mentioned that her father had died of black lung, or that her brother worked at a chicken processing plant, or that her grandmother made preserves to sell at the roadside because her social security barely covered utilities. But the dreams got worse. Every night, Ruby dreamed of the mountains. She walked through familiar hollers, past the old Jessup homestead, where her great-great-grandfather had settled in the 1880s. In the dreams, something followed her, a presence she could never quite see, always just at the edge of her vision. It whispered in a language she almost understood, words that made her bones ache with longing. Come home, it seemed to say. Come home where you belong. She'd wake up gasping, her pillowcase soaked with sweat, that pulling sensation back in her chest. Ashley complained about Ruby's nightmares, said she talked in her sleep, called out names Ashley didn't recognize. Finally, Ashley requested a room transfer, and Ruby found herself alone in the dorm room, which was both a relief and somehow worse. 3 months into the semester, Ruby called home. Mama answered on the 4th ring, her voice thin and distant. "Ruby May, that you, child?" "Yes, ma'am, how are you?" "Oh, you know, getting by. These old bones don't work like they used to." A pause. "How's the city treating you?" Ruby thought about lying, painting a picture of success and happiness. But she'd never been able to lie to Mama. "It's hard. I'm doing good in my classes, but I don't fit here, Mama. And the dreams, they're getting worse, aren't they?" Mama's voice was knowing. "The pull." "Yes," Ruby's voice broke. "Why won't it stop? Why won't the mountains let me go?" "Because you're a Jessup woman, child, and the mountains know their own." Mama sighed heavily. "Your mama went through the same thing, fought it for years, but in the end, she came back. That she did. Married your daddy, settled down, tried to make a life. But the mountains had already taken their toll. She was never quite right after she tried to leave. Something in her was broken, bent in a way that couldn't be fixed." Ruby closed her eyes, feeling tears slide down her cheeks. "I can't come back, Mama. If I come back now, I'll never leave again." "I know, honey. I know." The old woman's voice was gentle. "But you got to ask yourself, is being away worth the price you're paying? There ain't no shame in coming home." After they hung up, Ruby sat in her dorm room and cried. For her mother, who died trying to find a place between her dreams and her reality. For Jessie, who'd never had dreams at all. For Mama, growing old and alone in a house that was slowly falling apart. For herself, caught between two worlds and belonging to neither. Thanksgiving break came, and Ruby went home. She told herself it was just a visit, that she'd go back to Lexington after the holiday. But as the bus wound back through the mountains, as those ancient peaks rose up around her like the walls of a womb, she felt something in her chest loosen. The constant pull that had plagued her for months eased. She could breathe again. Jesse picked her up at the station, and this time he smiled when he saw her. "Well, look at you, city girl." "Shut up," Ruby said, but she was smiling too. She'd missed him more than she'd realized. The house looked smaller than she remembered, more worn. Mama had aged in the past 3 months, her movements slower, her eyes dimmer. But she hugged Ruby fiercely and cooked her favorite foods, cornbread and beans, fried chicken, apple stack cake. They sat around the table like they used to, and for a few hours, Ruby could pretend she'd never left. But that night, the dreams came back with a vengeance. Ruby walked through the holler behind the house, following a path she'd known since childhood. The moon was full and unnaturally bright, turning everything silver and strange. She could hear something ahead of her, a sound like singing, like weeping, like the wind through empty mine shafts. The path led to an old place, a spot where the Cherokee had lived before they were driven out on the Trail of Tears. Mama had told her about it when she was little, how the land remembered all the suffering that had happened here, how it held on to pain the way a wound holds infection. In the clearing, Ruby saw her mother. Sarah Jessup stood in the moonlight, young and beautiful, exactly as she looked in the single photograph Ruby owned. She smiled sadly at her daughter. "Mama?" Ruby's voice was a whisper. "You look just like me," Sarah said. Her voice was wind and water, echo and memory. "Same stubborn chin, same fire in your eyes. I don't understand what's happening." "You're seeing true, baby girl, the way Jessup women always have." Sarah moved closer, though her feet didn't quite touch the ground. "The mountains are alive, Ruby. Not in the way folks think of alive, not trees and animals and such, but something older, something that was here before humans and will be hereafter. It feeds on us, on our sorrow and our striving, especially on women like us." Ruby felt fear crawling up her spine. Why? Why us? Because we see, because we know, because we're strong enough to feed it for years and years without quite breaking. Sarah's form flickered like a candle flame. "I tried to leave, just like you, made it 100 miles before the pull got too strong. When I came back, I thought, if I just gave in, if I just accepted my place, it would be enough. But it wanted more. It always wants more." "What did it want?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears that glowed silver in the moonlight. "A sacrifice. My life for yours. That's the price for Jessup women who try to leave. We can go, but only if we pay in blood." Ruby shook her head violently. "No, that's not real. You died in childbirth. It was complications, the doctor said." "The doctor was right, in his way. But why do you think those complications happened? Why do you think I bled out when I should have been fine?" Sarah reached out, and though she was insubstantial, Ruby felt the ghost of her mother's touch on her cheek. "I tried to cheat it, baby, tried to leave while I was carrying you. Thought if I could get you born in another place, you'd be free. But the mountains knew, and they took their due." Ruby was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. "I won't come back, I won't. I'll fight it." "You can't fight it, Ruby May. You can only choose." Sarah's form was fading, becoming more transparent. "You can go back to the city, live your life, but the pull will never stop. It'll eat at you every day until there's nothing left but longing and regret. Or you can stay, make your peace with these hills, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to live that doesn't destroy you completely." "That's not a choice. That's not fair." "No," Sarah agreed, her voice barely audible now. "It's not. But it's what we have. What we've always had. The mountains don't care about fair, baby girl. They just care about keeping what's theirs." Ruby woke up screaming. Mama was there in seconds, her old body moving faster than seemed possible. She held Ruby while she cried, rocking her like a child, murmuring soft words. "You saw her, didn't you?" Mama said. "Your mama." Ruby could only nod. "She came to me too after she died. Told me to look after you, to tell you the truth when the time came." Mama's voice was thick with emotion. "I'm sorry, child. Sorry you got born into this. Sorry for all of it." "What do I do, Mama?" Ruby's voice was broken, desperate. "What do I do?" "That's the question, ain't it? The one every Jessup woman has had to answer." Mama pulled back, looking Ruby in the eye. "I can't tell you what to choose, but I can tell you this. Whatever you decide, make sure it's really what you want. Don't let the mountains choose for you. And don't let fear choose for you. You got more strength than your mama did, Ruby May. I see it in you. Maybe that's enough. Ruby didn't go back to Lexington after Thanksgiving. She called the school and withdrew, citing family emergency. Ashley had already found a new roommate anyway. The scholarship money was gone, but Ruby didn't care. She couldn't focus on classes when her whole world had been turned upside down. But she didn't give up either. If the mountains wanted to keep her, fine. She'd stay, but she'd do it on her own terms. Ruby got a job at the county library, 20 hours a week, shelving books and helping patrons with the computers. It wasn't much, but it was something. She signed up for online classes through the state university, taking them one at a time as she could afford them. She moved into a small apartment above the hardware store in town, not leaving the mountains, but putting some distance between herself and the old homestead. The pull eased. Not gone, never gone, but manageable. Like a chronic ache you learned to live with, she visited Mama every Sunday, helping with chores and canning and the endless maintenance an old house required. Jesse came by sometimes, and slowly they rebuilt their relationship. He started drinking less, working more. Having Ruby around seemed to stabilize something in him. Months passed, then a year. Ruby kept taking classes, kept working at the library. She started a book club for local kids, many of them growing up as poor as she had. She taught them that reading could be an escape, that education was a form of resistance against the poverty that wanted to swallow them whole. And slowly, carefully, Ruby began to understand something her mother never had. You couldn't run from the mountains, but you didn't have to let them crush you either. One evening in late spring, Ruby was closing up the library when she felt it. That familiar pull, but different somehow. Urgent. She locked the door and drove straight to Mama's house, her heart pounding. She found the old woman sitting on the porch, wrapped in a quilt despite the warm evening. Mama looked different, faded, like Sarah had been in Ruby's dream. "There you are," Mama said softly. "I was hoping you'd come." Ruby sat down beside her, taking her grandmother's cold hand. "What's wrong? Should I call the doctor?" "Ain't nothing a doctor can fix, child," Mama smiled gently. "My time's come. I can feel it. Just wanted to see you once more before I go." "Don't talk like that. You're strong. I'm old and I'm tired. Been carrying the weight of these mountains for 83 years, and I'm ready to lay it down." Mama squeezed Ruby's hand with surprising strength. "But before I go, I need to tell you something, a secret the Jessup women have kept for generations." Ruby leaned in close. "The thing in the mountains, the one that pulls at us, it ain't evil exactly. It's just old and hungry and lonely. It wants to be known, to be remembered. That's why it holds on to people like us, the ones who see and know and remember." Mama's eyes were distant, looking at something Ruby couldn't see. "But here's the secret. It can be bargained with. Not for freedom, not really. But for purpose." "I don't understand." "Your mama tried to run, I tried to endure. But you, Ruby May, you found the third way. You're staying, but you're not giving up. You're feeding the mountains, but you're feeding yourself too. That's the balance we've been looking for all these years." Mama reached into her apron pocket and pulled out an old key, pressed it into Ruby's palm. "This is for the root cellar under the house. Down there, you'll find journals. Every Jessup woman for 5 generations has kept one, writing down what she knew, what she saw, what she learned about living with the mountains. Read them, learn from them, and then write your own. Mama and Ruby, teach those kids at your library. Teach them to love these hills without letting the hills break them. Teach them there's more than one way to be strong. That's how we win, child. Not by running, not by giving in, but by remembering who we are and where we come from, and refusing to let it define everything we become. Mama died that night, sitting on the porch with Ruby holding her hand. She slipped away, as gentle as fog lifting, a smile on her weathered face. Ruby cried, but they were good tears, clean tears. Mama had lived a full life on her own terms, and she died the same way. 5 years later, Ruby Mae Jessup stood in front of a classroom at the community college in Hazard, teaching Appalachian literature to a room full of students who looked just like she had once, hungry for knowledge, desperate to understand where they came from and where they might go. She'd finished her degree online, then gotten her teaching certificate. The pull was still there. It would always be there. But she'd made peace with it. She'd read the journals, all of them, and understood that she was part of something bigger than herself, a legacy of women who'd refused to be broken, who'd found ways to survive and even thrive in impossible circumstances. Jessie had gotten sober 2 years ago, met a good woman from Plainville. They had a baby on the way. Ruby saw them every Sunday after she visited Mama's grave and checked on the old house. She'd kept it maintained, turned it into something of a local museum, preserving the history of the Jessup family and the coal mining communities of Harlan County. The nightmares had never fully stopped, but they'd changed. Now when she walked through the mountains in her dreams, her mother walked beside her, and sometimes Mama too, and other women she recognized from the journals, generations of Jessup women who'd each found their own way to live with the mountains. One evening, a student stayed after class, a girl named Emma who reminded Ruby of herself. Shy, whip-smart, with that particular hunger Ruby recognized. "Miss Jessup," Emma's voice was hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever feel like the mountains are holding on to you, like there's invisible chains keeping you here?" The girl's eyes were wide, afraid. Ruby looked at her student for a long moment, thinking about all the ways she could answer. She could lie, could tell Emma that was just superstition, that she was free to go wherever she wanted. Or she could tell the truth, the hard, complicated truth about what it meant to be from these hills. "Yes," Ruby said finally. "I feel it every day, but here's what I've learned. Those chains, they're not just holding you back, they're also holding you up. These mountains, they're in your blood, in your bones. They've shaped everything you are, and you can fight that, or you can learn to use it." "I don't understand," Ruby smiled. "Come to my office hours tomorrow. I have some journals I want you to read. Stories of women from around here, women who faced the same choice you're facing. They'll help you understand that there's more than one way to be free." Emma nodded slowly, something like hope flickering in her eyes. She thanked Ruby and left, and Ruby gathered her things, preparing for the drive home. As she walked to her car, Ruby looked up at the mountains rising dark against the twilight sky. They were beautiful and terrible, generous and cruel, her home and her inheritance. She felt the pull, that familiar ache in her chest, but it didn't frighten her anymore. "I'm still here, Mama," she whispered to the wind, "still standing, still fighting, still free." The mountains didn't answer, but Ruby hadn't expected them to. They'd already said everything they needed to say, and Ruby had learned to listen. She'd learned that you could honor where you came from without letting it determine where you ended up. That you could love something and still demand it treat you better. That strength came in many forms, and sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stay and fight to make things better. She got in her car and drove home through the winding mountain roads, past the old homesteads and the abandoned mines, past the present and into the future. Behind her, the mountains watched, as they'd always watched, ancient and patient and hungry. But Ruby Mae Jessup wasn't afraid anymore. She was Appalachia's daughter, yes, but she was also her own woman, and that made all the difference. The story of the Jessup women wasn't over. It was just beginning again, written fresh with every choice, every act of resistance, every moment of grace carved out of hardship. Ruby would teach her students, would write her own journal to add to the collection, would pass on the hard-won wisdom of generations. And when her time came to add her voice to those who walked the mountains in dreams, she would do so knowing she'd lived fully, loved deeply, and never, not for a single moment, let the mountains make her smaller than she was meant to be. That was the real secret, the one that took generations to learn. The mountains didn't have to be escaped. They had to be transformed, one person at a time, one choice at a time, one act of stubborn, beautiful resistance at a time. Ruby Mae Jessup drove home through the gathering dark, and the mountains, ancient, eternal, unchanged, somehow seemed just a little bit different than they had been before. Maybe they were learning too.